So, hi everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are in
Mm,
the world and in time. My name is Mary Edwards, and I'm a composer and environmental sound artist, and I investigate sound in natural and built environments. My practice encompasses installation, film scoring, and performance, and themes of temporality, impermanence, nostalgia, and the natural world recur throughout my work. And I'm interested in the emotive, historic, cinematic, and spatial properties of sound. Listening is and has always been an inherent and integral part of my process in conveying how all sounds have the potential to be habitable and how they can be transformative once you get inside them, as they are simultaneously intimate and immense. And that brings me to talk about an ongoing project. Everywhere We Are is the Farthest Place, which is a soundscape composition recreated from field recordings I gathered while on an Arctic expedition above the 78th parallel. That was the very
mm,
expedition where I met Jen Kotler, who worked on the Hubble telescope, and Jen was the person who introduced me to UCADE. And that was back in 2023, I believe, or late, shortly after we came back from the expedition. So the work is vibroacoustic natural events that have been captured, such as iceberg torrents, calving glaciers, whale song, and converging subterranean rivers on the Meltwater Channel that are now reimagined as an ode rather than an elegy. My intention is to take us to the outer space that resembles its earthly NASA terrestrial analog site of the Svalbard Arctic Desert and land us back down to praise our natural surroundings right now in the face of rapid change. Or, as I'd like to say, unother the others and decentralize the centered. And this pertains in part to the facet of environmental exclusion and how we can use our collective voice or expression and belonging and sustainability even at its baseline. For example, in discussing climate change, its entry points are chronologically arbitrary. Who's an expert if we're all at the hands of nature? And are we speaking about what changes have occurred in, say, the past 7 days, or a month, or a year, or a century, or maybe a millennia? In any event, a common denominator is grief and or a great sense of loss. And at times it becomes very personal. And my piece, in part, is about facing and embracing, if only for a moment, the striking beauty and terror of the transformation. It also speaks to the breath and pulse point of the earth as reflected in our own emotional responses to places that have qualities of being both intimate and immense, so that there's joy and wonderment there too. And it can activate memories about other places we've been in our lifetime. And the concept of intimate immensity, as derived from the mid century work of French philosopher Gaston Bachelard in his book, The Poetics of Space, is what drives a significant part of my work. Spaces that are at once sublime and yet close and ensconcing, and places that can make one feel vulnerable because of their largesse, and at the same time hold you in these special nuances. Everywhere We Are as the Farthest Place is a living, breathing thing in constant transition, and my initial intention was to create a musical composition, and it quickly developed into a multi-iterative project. I made a decision early on to make the work as transformative as the very landscape and environment I was composing about, while drawing a parallel to another work in progress at that time called Tamalpais Higher. So back in 2022, I embarked on this project that I was also investigating in response to my encounters at Mount Tamalpais in Northern California, located in Sausalito, just north of the Marin Headlands, where I was in residency for that summer. And I'd always been intrigued by Mount Tam, as the locals and those in the know call it, by its eminence as a sacred epicenter and its geological and oceanographic origins. I was not only curious about what's on the mountain, but what lies within. I learned that seismologists and geoscientists have suggested that a blind thrust fault lies beneath the mountain. It's a fault line that runs upward on an angle and functions the way an aneurysm, say, functions in and affects the body. If one does exist under Mount Tamalpais and it ruptures, The result could be a devastating earthquake for the entire San Francisco Bay Area and its surrounding region. And it's difficult to predict if and when such a quake would occur. And even so, what might that activity sound like when the mountain that appears majestic yet dormant is sonorous? Much of how I envision this project synthesized around a passage from On the Importance of Natural Disasters by installation and land artist Walter DeMaria, in which he talks about natural disasters being looked upon the wrong way and that they might be the highest form of art to possibly experience. And from his musing that if all people who go to museums could just feel an earthquake, I drew another idea to create an imaginative soundscape by synthesizing field recordings from that area with narrative and sound composition, temporarily turning the studio space given to me during my residency at Headland Center for the Arts into an environment in which the visitor can experience these sonic assemblages as a composite of natural events, both destructive and regenerative, as frightening things can also be beautiful. And it was a perfect preface to the work I would do later that fall with this Arctic Space Analogs project, Everywhere We Are is the Farthest Place. At its essence, it's a gathering of sounds that have been transformed into sonic meditations. And like Tamalpai's Higher, it looks to the data gathered with hydrophones, geophones, and contact mics to make hard information more integrative and sensual. In part, I was experimenting with how to keep a record of my emotional responses to the change in the environment, as I found the entire experience to be quite poetic. Days were measured in elegant afternoons. The space analog theme became this lost in space narrative running through my head as I was in a place that was seemingly isolated, but yet inhabited by others. I was listening to sounds that you would never hear on the surface of the water, like subterranean rivers intersecting in the meltwater channel, glaciers calving and communicating, the beauty and danger of nature immersion, countering silence, terrestrial vibrations and the slow rumble of the earth, and the glaciers and the ever-changing ice and conversation, the shifts and the splits giving way and always speaking in pops and cracks, the private concert of a whale song. This was all deepening my relationship to nature through the sea. And Kate, I'll have you play the videos now. Since we're all having the same issue with our hydrophones, trying to get that sound. I'm going 30 feet deep. The description for the next segment of this video is the water phone, amplified by the hydrophone and contact mic, is the primary instrument used to recreate calving glaciers, subterranean rivers, and whale song. And this is a demonstration of the water phone. The metallic tined instrument that can be played with a bow or mallets. And the stem, which I'm holding and gripping, is hollow, as is the basin. And you can fill it with water, and then it creates this, as you hear, warping sound, which is different from when it's played dry. Here it's being played with the mallets, and it's being amplified by the hydrophone, which has been turned into a contact mic with the suction attachment. The hydrophone is typically used to be immersed in water. Sounds in the studio program, studio recording, were generated through various programs, including Cubase and Logic, the assistance of Ken Evinger Suslowitz. And the next video that we're going to see and listen to is a live performance. In this next video, it will be a live performance of the work as performed by myself on the Moog Mother 32, waterphone, assorted electroacoustic instruments, and Michael Eaton playing the woodwinds, primarily the soprano saxophone and the C flute. And this was performed at the most resonant lobby of the Jefferson Market Library as part of New York Public Library. Thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions that anyone might have.
Actually, I would love it if you would describe again that instrument that you created. You're playing with the bow. It was, I don't remember if it had a name, but it was quite something. If you would describe how it looks and how you played it.
Ooh. That is the water phone, which I happen to have right back here. That's not my invention, unfortunately. I did create some soundboards and boxes out of industrial pieces, but this is the water phone, which is a hollow basin connected to a stem, which is also hollow. And you pour the water in that, and it has multiple tines. And when you bow it or use the mallet, it creates these ominous, rich sounds, sometimes haunting. It's an instrument that was created back in the 1960s by Richard Waters, and interestingly enough, contains water or can be used with water. And it's an instrument that I don't know quite how to classify it. Is it a bowed instrument? It's not a stringed instrument because it's metal, but it's been used in horror films as well as environmental nature documentaries to emulate those very sounds of rocks falling, calving glaciers, all kinds of seafaring events. Depending on how it's amplified, you'll get an assortment of sounds. And I fell in love with this instrument some time ago. And then I decided, let me get one so that I can see if I can recreate the very sounds that I heard when I was up in the Arctic. And then I found that pretty much wherever I would venture and listen to interesting sonic textures, I could use the waterphone to recreate some of that. The rest of the instrumentation is um, based on keyboards, woodwinds, and that's really to provide and create the layer of musicality for the compositions, and in particular this one.
And was there a particular source for the title of the overall project?
Yes, in terms of how I came up with the title.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So
Yes.
I was thinking about this notion of, of othering or feeling separate from things, or things being sort of singled out when I told a few people here in the States, oh, I'm going to the Arctic. Like, well, why are you going so far away? I said, well, isn't it all relative? There are people who live in Svalbard. It's the northernmost humanly habitable place on Earth, but it's quite contemporary, and uh, there's a good number of people who live there year round. And I thought, well, that's a good title for it. Everywhere we are is the farthest place. Um, on a very personal level, I was raised on Staten Island, which is a borough of New York City. It doesn't have the most savory reputation, but having been from here, I can tell you it is quite a beautiful and interesting place. But it's also deemed as being so far away from the the rhythm and the culture of the city. And interestingly enough, it's only a few miles away. I mean, it's surrounded by water, but we have several bridges, and you can get to and from. There's quite a bit of accessibility, and it may not hold as much cultural interest for many, but when one says to someone who lives in Staten Island to someone in Manhattan or Brooklyn, oh, come to Staten Island, and they're like, oh, well, it's too far. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense because in a hop, skip, and a jump, I can be in Brooklyn or Manhattan. But it's all a mindset about how we deem distance and how we deem what is on the other side of that distance. And so when I embarked on this um, expedition, it made me think about going to a place that, sure, from where I live is extremely far away, but for those who inhabit there, they have everything they need. It's very self-contained. And it also speaks to the way in which we regard the climate, uh, and the climate vulnerability and our own vulnerability to the climate change, and how some of the temperatures can be quite similar. So when we speak of, the Arctic gust or the Arctic breeze, it is very much that here in New York as it would be in, say, Svalbard.
I do have a question for you, Mary.
Yes, Cheryl.
Um, you have quite an atmospheric soundtrack, but I couldn't tell in the first scenes what was going on. I thought I could hear people, and so I was guessing it's the ship, but then
Yes.
I don't know what happened after that. So I wonder if in another iteration you could get maybe a line or two of narration. I mean, you could still do it fairly minimalist, but it's a common issue that I've noticed with sighted people or sound artists that they just make assumptions and they don't give me all of the information I need to really be able to appreciate the video.
You were correct in what you heard. It was ship activity. I was disembarking the barkentine and going into a Zodiac boat to then do further exploration through the fjords onto the glacier, because the boat itself can't anchor
Hmm.
the um, to the glacier because it's just so fragile. As I was saying earlier in the piece, that um, these glaciers, these areas they're majestic, and yet they're so fragile at the same
Hmm.
time. So
Right. You were telling us, but if you showed this to a group cold with none of that description, if there's those who can't see the screen, then would not have got that piece.
right, there wouldn't be enough sonic information to
Right,
ascertain
because
that it was a ship.
yeah, because a little small amount of minimal narration at the beginning, or maybe occasionally. I get why you didn't want to have a lot because you had a lot of atmospheric sound, but
Hmm.
a little bit more balanced to narration would have been helpful.
Sure, sure, it can be done.
Everyone cold is a blind person. I would get more out of it with some audio description, as Cheryl was saying.
Yeah, exactly, Amy.
Mary,
Show
just
I needed controls.
And Cheryl, your
Yep.
screen
Show I needed controls.
getting
Hold up,
shared.
anyone with access to the
Whoops.
hold this.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a hazard of Zoom. Somebody else had a question?
yeah, I just actually had an observation. Um, my cat was sitting in a chair next to the desk and was quite disturbed by the sounds in the first video. Woke up, he was sleeping. He woke up, he was very alert. I tried to pick him up and bring him onto my lap while it was going on, and he was having none of it. He ran. So he was thinking it was some kind of crittery type stuff that he didn't like.
I think we absolutely have to experiment with this more later this evening.
No, we don't.
I'll get the cats off the ceiling if it
Yeah.
ends up being a problem.
All right. That's interesting. I know, yeah, I definitely felt an emotional reaction with that, and I think that your presentation, along with Duncan's last in April from Loud Numbers, and what their group is trying to do and tying it to the data that they're gathering. I think that what I'm enjoying a lot about what happens in Sonification World Chat and the GeoSonNet is the number of different ways that people are working with sound and in interpreting it, and are getting. I think it's just that whole gambit of, you know, musicality, all the explanations that you gave prior to, and your thought processes. I mean, I'm a teacher and an accessibility problem solver, definitely not an artist or sound anything. Um, so this being exposed to other ways of thinking and organizing information, this is, I find it fascinating. So I really appreciated your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realize that a piece like what Mary shared doesn't have to stand as research. It could be partnered with someone's scientific research project as what Kate just said, a different perspective on it. So I could imagine someone like Amy and her research about accessible oceans, which is coming at it, her work through the lens of an oceanic researcher, and then including that as part of a presentation that also includes Mary's work, because it's also very much about the oceans. And so I'd like to see more partnerships between the researchers and the artists in terms of how their works are combined together in presentations.
Yeah, when you,
So almost like a concert program. That's what I'm thinking of, a concert program or an online concert, something like that, where you could have a short presentation by Amy or someone else about their work with sonification to share geoson geoscience data, and then an excerpt from Mary's work. Here's another way this information can be presented and shared.
well, when you think about those, when you're working with graphs and charts or visual interpretations of data, and you also provide a visual of the thing that you're measuring, or you get closer to that combination of either sonification of that's more closely tied to data, but plus giving that experience of what it is that you're measuring, that what, I think that analog that is certainly worth exploring. So other comments, thought.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so I really appreciated your description of everything, as well as I enjoyed listening to the sounds and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting that in your descriptions you had a lot of paradoxes, like you had like destructive and regenerative, isolated but also inhabited by people. And of course, your title is also kind of a paradox as well. And like what kind of, like I wanted to ask about like how that like, so what was your process in turning those paradoxes into sound and like developing that kind of sound?
Oftentimes when we're thank you for your comments. Thank you everybody for your feedback. Micah, I was thinking about how we're often programmed to listen to certain sounds that correspond with certain emotions, and I didn't want to do that. And that's part of the paradox is toggling between what's expected and what's not expected. Um, that to describe things as both beautiful and terrifying, or um, you know, destructive and regenerative. To me, it's what's thinking about when we speak of death, and we think of death as a singular event, and I think of it as part of a life cycle. That death is not a single entity. Just like our sets of emotions and how we respond to things is not, there's not a singularity about it. And so, in composing around that, it's what happens when we're sitting by the window on any given day and the sun is shining, but then the clouds are in constant motion. And sometimes it casts a different kind of light through the window, or that we can experience a range of motions all within a matter of moments, depending on how we react to things, but not just how we react in the moment, but to things that come up as uh, memories or trigger responses. So that all factors into how I compose, in that it's trying to create a palette of sound that is at once relatable, but at the same time unexpected. And that there's that familiarity, but then it's going to take you somewhere else and leave something up to interpretation. Leaves a little bit of margin for that.
I mean, what instruments have you, I'm wondering what instruments are your particular instruments? Are you a vocalist? Are you an instrumentalist? W- What do you call on?
I started off playing piano and percussion, but I've delved into many different types of instruments. When growing up, I played a lot of brass instruments. I played the French horn, the euphonium. I played the timpani, which is there's a crossover between percussion and an instrument that can be tuned at the same time. I mean, drums can be tuned. Piano is very percussive, so there's again that sort of overlapping of instruments. And then I stayed steady with the keyboards, but then I started looking at other percussive instruments. And when the waterphone came into my vocabulary, um, I started giving that a lot of attention, and then starting to look at the vibratory aspects of instruments. What happens when you take an everyday instrument and amplify it? What other kinds of sounds can it produce? Um, I take little things like like mint boxes and put in like acoustic panels and uh, sometimes put bands on them or strings and amplify them with the microphone only to get sounds that would otherwise be, you know, inert because they're so quiet. But then when they're played through a speaker and oftentimes through a delay pedal, it really does give a canyon-esque effect. And that's what you're hearing in that second video with Michael playing the flute and the soprano saxophone. He's playing through the microphone that is rigged through a delay pedal. And then it just creates this really deep, rich, cavernous texture. So right now I'm in the stage of just exploring the depths of acoustics with instruments as opposed to say focusing on one instrument as I did earlier on in my practice or focusing on a set of instruments or a family of instruments. I'm sort of interested in just how to play anything from the very desk that I'm working at or turn anything into, what can we turn into an instrument? That's fun for me. And
So the curiosity and the sense of play is very important to
yeah,
you.
it is. It's become more so. I think I was like that when I was much younger, and I went through a very sort of serious phase of focusing on what was presented to me as opposed to what were the possibilities with that said thing. And now I do that with the environment and space. Like, how can I play a tree? How can I play the wind? How can I play water? Uh, so I'm exploring different ways of doing that. So it's
Well, thank you.
non-traditional, but
Yeah.
encouraging others to broaden their palette.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to hearing how our data scientists take this in and ponder it and come back, encourage us to come back with questions. Or if you have, after thinking about this presentation and loud numbers and along with our, expanding our own knowledge bases, you know, do suggest topics that we'd like to explore, because I think that's where the richness of this community could help expand what we explore and be innovative.